we feel? When we met in the book, we spoke a little bit about like anticipating what we think, given Lorde's commitment and her acknowledgements in the beginning of the book. We spoke a little bit about like what we anticipate. My first question for us as we dive into tonight's session was, is there anything that stood out to you in particular? It didn't have to be in the first couple of chapters. It could have been toward the end or maybe within chapter 8. But is there something that stood out to you that you're like, this is the thing, this is the moment, this is the reason why I'm going to continue reading this book? Has anything compelled you to stay in Lorde's story so far? Maybe it's
I like the fact that she recreates the inner world of a child that's 4 and 5 years old. And I mean, there's a whole universe going on in her head, and we don't often, well, you don't see that in literature. And we don't often think that young children that age have that much going on, but they're as busy and as complex as we are.
Yes. Defay, is this how you pronounce it? Defay. That is brilliant. Thank you. Can you tell a little more about like what stood out to you, what that looks like? Because you're right. She gives all this inner dialogue to a baby. What exactly, or what parts were it that?
Well, I can remember because I just finished chapter 5.
Period.
When she gets into the bed with her mother early in the morning, when father's in the kitchen cooking, and she's playing with that rubber water ball. Mm-hmm. And I enjoyed it because I also wanted to play with and feel that water bubble because it moves around and it's warm and it's textured. Oh man, I mean, she had so much fun with that. And that was also sensual without being filthy. You know?
What made it sensual?
Oh, come on now. The water.
Yes.
The touching of her mother with her body, the touching of the water ball, the water and mom. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I just wanted to make sure we all caught the sensuality. Folks, I mean, that was beautiful. Anyone have anything to add? Agree, disagree? Anything else that stood out for folks?
I actually thought in that scene she was going somewhere else as far as, discovering her own womanhood and being in the bed with her mother. And I guess it kind of does go in that direction, but that's what I thought that scene was about, like how girls sort of identify what it means to be a woman. And the same thing for men, when you're a boy, how you sort of grasp the idea of adulthood. Not just with the complexities of life, but also with the body.
Yes, because you look at the adult body and you're like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to, look like or grow into. And those are for the children who I guess feel lucky enough that they feel that reflection in their mom or dad, because some kids don't have that. Yep, that's excellent. Anything else that stood out to folks? I got a part. If you haven't said it. All right.
I have a friend from Grenada, and I called her just to ask her how to pronounce certain words.
Someone did the homework. Clap it up for Anna real quick, y'all, because this was I
hadn't talked to her in a while, so it was an excuse to call her.
Hey,
but she was smiling, and I promised her the book when I finished it, because she's from Grenada, and I said, her mother's the woman from Belmar, and all these little, like terms that they use, and she laughed. She was laughing, and I'm like, all right, good. So she made a connection quickly, and the thing that you're talking about sensuality, and what was that thing about? When she was waiting outside, when she was all fully clothed to go outside.
Let's find the page.
Huh?
Let's find that page. Who has a book near them? Help me find the page. Let's look at it together.
And I only read to chapter 6 because the notification is a little confusing.
Yes.
I'm like, I ain't reading all the way.
It's chapter 4.
Yeah. Right.
Anais, you are my.
Because it also, I wrote that thing also about that scene on the steps.
With the little girl?
The little girl dressed in her red velvet
Yeah, was that
Her red velvet hat with
imaginary
her
or
white
was that
pom-pom.
real? Had me going.
Was that imaginary? Was that real, folks? How do we feel about Anna's question?
I think it was real.
Yeah,
Me too.
me too.
Yeah, because the mother saw her, but still, I don't know.
Yeah, she did.
Or did she?
Anais, what stood out to you about that section? It's interesting that you and Anna kind of are naming the same thing here. What stood out?
Well, kind of building on what Ron was saying about little children discovering their sensuality. I thought it was, what stood out to me was I was about to pull down Tony's panties and I heard the main door open, and out of the front hallway heard my mother. And this whole scene of how she's so fascinated with this little girl. She wants this playmate. She doesn't have a little sister. Apparently the girl looks stunning in her outfit. And she gets her to sit on her lap, and that she goes to that place, you know, like from holding her, it was very sweet. She's holding her, they're laughing. And then how she goes from that to like digging into little girls' panties and wanting to pull them down. I just thought that was like really, wow, that's so interesting. Like this discovering sensuality, like thing.
Right. Because it shows, for me too, given how far apart it is, literally the text, it feels within the text that it's happening rather quickly to the reader. You know, you're like, it's kind of like before you know it, you're like, wait a minute, what the hell? Oh, this is what's going on. Yeah. So I like that you brought that up, because I think the feeling sort of emulates, especially as a kid, how confusing and sort of affirming it is, right? To even through a semi messed up way, try to understand sexuality in a tangible way, right? I think that's how it is for children often. It's like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, but something is affirming that this is, right? I have a feeling, something inside me is happening. I'm recognizing it. What do we think about? Oh, yep.
I was going to follow up on that point, both Paul and Anna East. Like, do we think this is just curiosity, just plain old curiosity?
You took it right
Or
from me.
is this like, is this, can this be labeled queer behavior? I mean, you know, assuming that, I mean, knowing how we label boys who are engaged in what we would consider, in quotes, heterosexual behavior from the time they're born, just because they, you know, they want to chase girls and do whatever. Do we see this as queer behavior or just like, you know, kid curiosity? I thought of it as youthful curiosity, but.
I saw it as queer behavior. You know, like incipient. She's 4 years old. At the beginning of the chapter, she says, I found my first playmate when I was around 4. And my just kind of my sense is that it does happen around that time, earlier than that time, around that time. Because it starts out with this, you know, hugging her, and she says, I put my arms around back around her shoulder. Was she really a little girl or a doll come alive? You know, so she's like still like fascinated with this beautiful little thing in front of her, and the holding her. And it could have stayed at that. It could have stayed at just being on her lap and holding her, and oh, I have a little playmate, or it would feel so good. But that's a really, to me, that's a radical move to make, to go under her, you know, all her layers of clothes and get to her panties and pull down her panties. I think that was sexual curiosity. And yeah.
I think there's, to answer, I don't know if this is the answer, but when I'm hearing the terms that we're using to describe the situation, I wonder if sexual curiosity, there isn't coming from a child, if it is innocent, right? There is, what I'm trying to name is that there is an innocence from sexual curiosity. I think like queer curiosity and sexual curiosity, the way I understand sexuality to be, whether it was with a little girl or a little boy, in which Audre described this experience, it is affirming the sexuality within her, right? Her trying to say, oh, this is what it is. I don't know if it's an indicator of her queerness, if not more an indicator of her being aware of her sex, you know, and does that relate to her actual sexual identity? I don't know. That's the question I posed to y'all. But I'm wondering,
we had not known about her
Right.
later on, would
Right.
we think that queer or not? You know,
That's the question I'm asking, I guess. Yeah, excellent. Yeah. What do we think, y'all?
I think it's normal.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't read. I thought that today was the first session and we would be planning what chapters to read. But so I guess because I haven't read it, I could just give you, based on what I've heard, my opinion. And actually, let me hold my opinion, and I want to pose this question. Why are we saying that it has to be sexual curiosity as opposed to just the curiosity of a child? It's a child's nature to be curious, you know, and I'm a science teacher, you know, so this is something that I teach my kids: be curious, look at things, observe, ask questions. Why are we adding the label of sexual to just the curiosity? That's my question.
That's a great question. That's a great question. And I think I'm seeing the term as interchangeable. I think sexual curiosity is a curiosity just in regard to the body. And I do wonder what makes us think that it's sex. And maybe it's because she did something overt around her panties. So that's terminology just goes that way. But I think sexuality meant more in regard to, is it because that is a little girl and Audre grows up to be a lesbian? So that's what people are naming.
Right, I get that, but
yeah,
it could just be her wanting to know, does yours look the same as mine? You know, like,
absolutely,
it has to be tied to sex, what I'm saying, because at that age, she might not even be thinking, because sexuality is about who you want, looking at it from scientific terms, who you want to mate with. She's a child, she's not thinking about that at that point. You know, it's just about, let me see the anatomy. What does it look like? You know, is it like mine? Am I the same or different? It could just be pure curiosity is what I think.
Right. But it's to categorize what kind of curiosity. And I don't think sex necessarily has to mean you want to go to bed with somebody. So it's like, you know, it's just like an expression, and it happens to be, you know, if you're looking at the moon, that's another science. And it's, you know, like, you know, you're talking about the moon and the planets and whatever. But now you're talking about a little girl, you know, kind of, because she had a little fantasy before that. I think in the previous chapter, maybe she had another little fantasy about another little girl, I think it was. And, you know, to say it's sexual to me is not anything wrong. It's purely, you know, it's fine. It's fine.
It's maybe, and I think Audre is asking us to ask this. I think Audre is saying, I'm including it in my mythical autobiography around how I've become a Black lesbian poet. So it's for you to decipher if these experiences I'm having may have led to my understanding of sexuality, or if I'm just sharing with you my curiosity. I think, Debbie, that like you bring up this point in order for us to name that. I think she's encompassing all of this, you know? And I agree, I do agree, Anna, that sexuality is not a negative implication at all. I think it shows a vulnerability and a normalcy that we don't oftentimes when Black women speak of their own bodies in this way, people do deem it as like, oh, this is inappropriate or this is something. So the fact that she's connecting it to a childhood understanding, I think there's like a compassion there. Curious face. Yeah.
I don't know,
So
for me, I guess
it's not necessarily negative, you know?
Yeah.
Right, it's not, but then how can I pose this? You know, just thinking of the fact that I just had a similar discussion with a colleague today. Black women's bodies are over-sexualized. So I tend to, you know, that's like almost a trigger for me, especially being a teacher, when we add these categories to childhood innocence. Because for me, she is exploring, but it doesn't have to be tied to sexuality. And for us to be putting that label on a 4-year-old, it's almost, you know, contributing to that stereotype of like Black girls don't have their innocence. They're not ever looked at as being a child. It's always, you know, unfortunately, because the history of a lot of us, you know, their bodies were a commodity, you know, so
right, for sure.
I don't know. I just don't feel.
No, I don't think you're wrong. I think
After
the connecting factor in what you're saying and she's saying is the same thing. I think what's missing, or I don't even know if it's missing. I think you both make valid points. What I understand though is that sexuality in itself, like there is an innocence, but if we understand sexuality within the child, that is innocent for a child to experience any sort of sense of sexuality through their own bodies or others. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the child or anything negative is even occurring. It's that the human body itself is sort of understanding what's before it. And again, I think Audre writes it gorgeously in this way that we don't necessarily take it as her being, the reader isn't sexualizing the 4-year-old, the author is naming, this is a very normal process for children to be within sex. Like this is normal. And it kind of empowers, or I don't want to use that word, but it's not necessarily inappropriate for the child to go through any sort of sexual understanding at that age. And I think she's trying to show us that, like, hey, this is actually where I understood this to be.
Okay.
And now that we speak aloud, I'm like, yo, I don't even think it has to do with her queerness. I think about what Debbie's saying, like she's just exploring. I think it has nothing to do with her queerness. And maybe it does, but
let's not negate that it might.
Period.
Right.
Because like you said, Anais, earlier, it's around that age, right? You named that for us. You were like, I feel like that's the age where you feel it.
Well,
right?
I'm just saying it can be as early as that age, and it's even younger. And there's also like a tendency to like not to want to negate that could actually be, you know, like that you know, children can be born and with a certain gender identity that is right there from the very beginning, or a sexual orientation. And it's not about when you get to be 12 or 14 and then it's a decision or it's a culture, or, you know, so I want to include that it could very well, I'm not saying it is, but it could very well be like a gender, you know, a queer, you know, move on the part of a 4-year-old who's, you know, without consciousness, maybe just even instinctually in that moment, you know, trying something, looking for something, exploring something that, you know, is interesting, maybe even exciting.
I'm excited because right now Audre has us in the quintessential Audre Lorde conversation of the Black woman, the Black feminist, the Black body, or the queer body. She has, you know, this is the main lens of her work as we see her for the rest of her life until 56, right? And we're in it right now. You know, I hear what Debbie's naming. Black women's bodies, Black little girls are constant, like sexuality. There's no luxury in being able to understand your sexuality in the ways that we're talking about. Like it's normal and it's okay. That's not a luxury for many Black women, right? So I definitely hear that. And in that we're naming, particularly if you exist in queer body, there's an affirmation, there's a norm, and there's something that like needs to be held, and not, we can't pretend like those things aren't existing or negate them or push them down. And this is where Audre works best, right? Because she has us sort of balancing these two identity forms.
Beautifully. I also think that traditionally, if that was a young boy who went into a young girl's panties, we might label him fresh, exactly. Fresh in a sexual way. You know, we would maybe be quicker to label him under a sexual identity, one heterosexual, but also at 4 years old, overly sexual, that he's already like, you know, and the reality is he is probably having the same curiosity not going after her, but touching the girl as he would touching a boy at that age.
Right. The only thing I don't disagree on, but I think that I think the little girl would also suffer that same sort of sexualization, to Debbie's point earlier. I
don't know in society whether we do that.
I think kids are seen as predatory I think it's more of a predatory thing. I think it's like, I don't know if you're being fresh, but I think it's more like oh, this child is emulating predatory behavior. And then, you know, as educators, most of us in here have been educators. We understand how the system kind of, you know, Anna's laughing, how the system kind of hones in on like who is a predatory sort of child. And I think behaviors like that lend in, I think children who exist within a gender binary or outside of the gender binary can face those sort of implications, especially if they're Black children, you know. What do y'all think?
That's how we're socialized.
Talk about it, Pam. What do you mean?
That's just the way we are taught to look at Black children and Black people. If there's anything sexual engaged, it's those people, and all they care about is sex, because that's what they say about Black women. We're so sexualized. And we have to break that chain and that misunderstanding that it's wrong. But if we don't get to shift that narrative, because one, people aren't listening and don't care what we have to say. And second, if we can't shift it, at least within our own cultures, it makes it impossible for children to be seen differently.
Right. Can I say something that I just saw in the chat that Liliana had added? It's funny how she wanted to keep the girl, right? Like a doll. So we're got into this whole sexual thing, but let's also name the innocence also again. And like, you know, I remember prior to my little brother being born, deeply wanting a sibling, and then he was born child, and I changed my mind. But I remember prior to the sort of that, like dealing with my little cousins and neighbors, and me being one of the elder grandchildren or the elder kid in the neighborhood, so having to deal with them, and sort of that innocent embrace that sort of Audre describes. Like, I remember being in that with a lot of children younger. And it is funny how she wanted to keep her. Liliana, can you talk a little bit more about why you said that? What stood out for you? Good. You're good. Can you? I don't know. If you don't have Liliana.
If you go to chapter 4, right there, it tells you, when I was around the age of 4 or 5, I would have given anything to have a friend, a little sister. It's like, I don't even remember that. You know, when I was like that age, there were 8 of us, so I didn't have time to think about that.
Older sisters.
Yeah, but she wanted a little sister. Oh, her audio is not working.
Oh, it's okay. No, please feel free to type if you want then, but I was just curious why that stood out to you. And yeah, folks, we're on page 34, if you want to see where we're reading from.
Yeah.
And it's true, after that sentence, she goes on to say, she would be someone I could talk to and play with, someone close enough in age to me that I wouldn't have to be afraid of her, nor she of me. Share our secrets with each other. Then she goes on to say, yeah, I had 2 older sisters, but I grew up feeling like an only child since they were close to each other in age, right? So she really wanted someone younger. I'm going to say something as a child that I couldn't articulate as a child, but I definitely understood that I wanted a younger sibling for the power dynamic. I did. I wanted someone that I could be like, yo, we're out, let's go. Or like, let's go to bed, or go help mom. Or, you know, I knew as a child that it would be really cool to be in that. So I wonder what parts of her curiosity were also just exploring the power dynamic, right? That I think children do often. So, oh, y'all are hot tonight. What's up?
Hello?
Yes, I hear you, Liliana.
Oh my God, yes.
You're on, Liliana.
You're on.
I was having a whole conversation by myself, and then everybody was jumping. I was like, how rude. No.
I'm sorry. No, we would never do that.
I actually don't remember your question, but I definitely wanted to say that something that really stood out for me, and I guess this is why I was like, I got to keep reading, was when she was in the classroom and her teacher asked her to write her name, and she wrote it like slanted, and she took out the Y, and I thought, like, oh my God, that is so brave and bold for her to decide that what she wants and, you know, doesn't like. And the fact that she, you know, just kept at it. And I thought that was such a beautiful scene. And obviously the teacher wasn't having it, but I really love that.
Absolutely. That's on page 25, folks.
What made that scene even more powerful was that she wasn't even supposed to write her name. I think she was just supposed to write a letter.
A letter.
They were doing letters. And and Audre decides to write her entire name, one name on the front of the page, her last name on the back of the page.
Yeah.
She takes up the entire page. And the teacher wants her to try again on the back of the page, and they flip it over, and she's already written her last name on the back of the page. So
Yeah.
she was really bold, just to take those extra steps of going from, just writing a letter to writing your entire name. That's yeah.
Yeah.
And Ron, if I can piggyback on that, she didn't want to write with that big fat crayon. That was for children. And the lines were so big, she didn't want that. She was advanced. She had two older sisters. Her mom is obviously spending some time teaching her to write her name and letters. So I don't know why she didn't learn to read her numbers, though. That bothered me.
Yeah.
She could say the alphabet forwards and backwards, but didn't know her numbers.
And she really doesn't know her numbers. It's not even marginal. She's like,
right.
Really doesn't know her numbers.
Yeah, she's off. I saw the implications of that too when she talks about not wanting to use the Y in Audre because it goes lower than lower than the line, and to her it's not even. She loved writing Audre Lorde without the Y, and then she always remembered she had to put it in to appease her mom. So yeah, I think it's sort of this idea of like from very early on we see like Lillian's naming, right? She's advocating for herself. She's like, this is how I want to do it. Yeah, and asking for pencils and paper instead of a crayon is like she understood the mediums for different things. She's like, a pencil and a paper, that's a medium for writing my name. A crayon is for when I want to draw pictures on the wall. Like she understood that. I thought that was brilliant too. Has anyone experienced that sort of educator that just is resistant to everything you do? A teacher who doesn't believe in you, basically, and who's like challenging you. And yeah, has anyone ever had those kind of experiences or knows about it?
Can't remember.
Yeah. I don't believe you. Yeah, but can you imagine just loving reading and writing that much and being that advanced, and then having a teacher really tell you like, no, this isn't it. And that being her first experience and her probably being even more committed to words after that, that's what shook me. We usually hear stories where children get discouraged. And it's like she did. And she was like, my teacher don't like me. I'm really going to do this,
Remember, early on, her mother identified her as the rebellious child. The other two sisters, they're the good kids. But this one here, and she can't see well. She's tripping over her feet. She's an outsider in the family. So somehow she found the strength to, as you say, advocate for herself.
Right. But you're right. I didn't consider that is actually the home base that she's coming from. And therefore, that teacher's like popcorn to her. She's like, oh, I'm going to do what I need to do.
And also the role.
Go ahead, Anais.
I was going to say also the role of her mother and how she responded. So the teacher makes her mother come in the next day and says, I don't think your child's ready for kindergarten because she won't follow instructions.
Yeah.
And then this is on page 27. She says, my mother knew very well I could follow directions because she herself had spent a good deal of effort and arm power making it very painful for me whenever I did not follow instructions.
I thought that was funny.
And she also believed that a large part of the function of school was to make me learn how to do what I was told to do. So in her private opinion, if the school couldn't do that, then it was not much of a school, and she was going to find a school that could. And so that same morning, she walks across the street and she puts her in Catholic school. So that was really powerful for me, like that her mother got it in the moment. You know, like, no, this is not a school for my child.
Yeah, her mother was a powerful woman too.
Yeah.
She walked the streets, people admired her, took her advice. And remember that scene where she says, don't call me mommy in the street. It's mother. So it's like that kind of, I guess, I don't know, Grenada, is it British upbringing? It's like schooling, the background, really strict, really, just, proper stuff.
How are we feeling? Proper stuff. speaking of proper stuff, how are we feeling about Audre's mom? How do we feel about Audre's mother? Like, how do we feel? I often feel conflicted as we go through the chapters. I'm like, that's stern Caribbean parenting. And then sometimes I'm like, this is mean. And other times I'm like, oh, she sees that her daughter's brilliant. I'm not a parent, so what do I know? So talk to me. How do we see Audre's mom?
I wouldn't mess with her.
Right? Anything stands out about her?
I have to say, like, yes, I agree with Anais. Like, she advocated for her daughter and like took her out, but then she switched her to a school and told her, no, you're allowed to be my child if misbehave.
But
So
that was the norm back then. I have to say, we have to accept that beating children wasn't unusual in school.
In parochial schools.
Yeah.
Parochial school.
Right. But Liliana, are you naming
Public
the
schools
idea?
too.
All schools.
Mhm.
Now, I remember
Liliana, are you
teaching
naming-
bilingual. The parent told me, if they don't listen, grab them by the ear. And I'm like,
Right.
okay. And then she just like, you tried that, they'll sue you.
Right. That's like a Black and brown understanding. But I do wonder,
I believe
Liliana,
I believe in positive parenting. I think the more you can say good about your child, the better they feel about themselves. The better they feel about themselves, the better they succeed and do well in school.
right, we'd all want to see a child being brought up sort of with that intentional loving, right? Like naming, I want you to feel good. And I do wonder, Liliana, if you were naming that, because I know Ron was like, well, that's a norm. That's what was happening back then. But is it less about like her telling that to the nun, or is it the idea that, wow, I took my child out of this one school because they didn't see her, but then sort of giving this other school permission to not see her in the same breath? Is that sort of what you were alluding to? Am I putting words in your mouth?
No, you're not putting. That's the whole thing, because like even in the classroom and how these nuns were, I can't remember the words that they will, like 1 week they were in the good side and 1 week they were in the
The brownies and the fairies or something?
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
already deminimizing, her trying to be or come up to be that person that her mother, I thought, will see in Audre.
Absolutely.
But putting in this school, I don't know how much of I mean, we're not that far to see if she can blossom, or the nuns can see that she has potential.
Right. But it is that idea of like, we see her, the mom clearly met a woman that didn't understand her daughter, but then put her in a space that was like, look, if she's being difficult, don't worry about understanding her, just hit her. So this is why I get conflicted with her mom, because I'm like,
Mhm.
and it's my job as the reader to feel like this.
And she was a little rebellious little girl, so she had to put some control while she was not with her mother. So maybe that's what the mother wanted, like, I know she's a little bit much, a handful, but every now and again. And they were, like Ron said, they were known for that. I used to make fun of people who were in parochial school. They used to get beat up, and not beat up, but
But they suffered a lot at the hands of the adults there, right? Like that's a normal thing. So yeah.
in more ways than one, but yeah.
We are talking parochial school. So now you're taking it, Anna, to the next book. Like, come on, let me get through this. Let me get through these chapters. Okay. Let me see. Something that came down. I also like Audre's use of, this is where we see the myth, the sort of mythology come in. Like when she's like Miss Teacher. It's like certain characters play such important parts, but also like, girl, we don't know her name. And there's like a sarcasm there that helps us lend into the story, because I'm like, she's funny, she's funny. I see this 4-year-old, 5-year-old in school. Yeah, they're being rebellious, but they're also being very witty, and I think that's what lends to the mythology of the biography, because she's able to change the lens of how we normally would read a 5-year-old as a 5-year-old, I don't know if we would give it that much onus. So that's cool. Where else has magic, or I say magic as a substitute term, but any of this feel like divine, God? Is there anything in here that has a sense of like, oh, she's speaking to a higher self, a spiritual thing? Has anything come up? I'm gonna find the line that I think, but I wonder if that's come up for y'all. I'm gonna start with the first, literally it's the first line. And I wonder why she writes it in italicized. Maybe y'all could tell me. To whom do I owe the power behind my voice? What strength have I become? Yeasting up like sudden blood from under the bruised skin's blister. She then goes on and says, this is literally the intro of it, right? Where she's like, my father leaves his psychic print upon me, silent, intense, and unforgiving. But his is a distant lightning. Images of women flaming like torches adorn and define the borders of my journey, stand like dikes between me and the chaos. It is the images of women kind and cruel that lead me home. That felt very spiritual, very divine to me. Talk to me about this imagery right here. Images of women flaming like torches adorn and define the borders of my journey, stand like dikes between me and the chaos.
Now that word dikes, it mean the word like the word, that term with water, the dike, or did it mean the term later on, like the women who were lesbians were called dykes? I got a little confused.
Maybe it was interchangeable.
Yeah.
She is a poet, remember that.
Yeah.
Right? She's writing many things as if we hear it in a stanza, but she writes it through prose, right? So it could be one of those interchangeable things. It made me Google the origin of the word dykes though. And I found, and I realized, because I too wondered, did dyke represent this like object, and her then using queerness to sort of like relate to that? Is that what it meant? And then the only thing I can find that didn't really mean anything to me, but maybe y'all could help me, is that another word for pliers, which I had no idea. Like if you go on a shopping site and you type in DIKES, it's pliers, like mad pliers come up. And
repeat that, Paula.
I'm like, oh my God. The original word for, I don't want to say the original word, but another word for pliers is dikes.
But that's with an I.
With an
I,
I.
you're saying.
No, absolutely. So that was the only sort of connection that I'm like, I can't find the word itself to relate or mean something else in this, but I do wonder how it stands out for y'all, and if anything else stood out for y'all. And I'm sharing with you as well that pliers are also dikes with an I. I had no idea. But what that particular part right there, like sort of that divine, what is she saying? What is she saying? Flaming like torches adorn and define the borders of my journey. I sort of got this idea that if she's describing her father as a distant lightning, then these are like pew, pew, bolts. You know what I'm saying? Like Zeus. Maybe that was a bad example because literally it's snowmen, but you know what I'm trying to say. Like someone that uses it with that sort of ferocity. And then she asks, so to whom do I owe the symbols of my survival? What is that? Yeah, I saw that face, D-Faye, talk to me.
Right, symbols.
Yeah.
Why
Woo.
symbols? Why not to whom do I owe my survival?
Right. Say it one more time, please. That was lovely.
What I wondered why she added the word symbols. Why didn't she simply say, to whom do I owe my survival?
What do we think, folks?
Symbols. Symbols of my survival. Symbols of my survival. To whom do I owe whom I become? Okay.
What do we think? Why not just to whom do I owe my survival? Why are they symbols? Where are these elements?
Maybe she is not putting her survival in the hands of peers or other people, but she might be putting her survival in things such as books,
Right.
or other symbols, not that a book is a symbol, but other forms of learning and forming identity that is not related to asking someone questions, but learning through an example, whether it is someone's way of being, whether they are books, whether they could be movies. I don't know. I'm just like,
This is great.
in defining who she is, she's not relying, she cannot, there was a time when you could not rely on how other people carried themselves, but within yourself, you knew you may have been different than what society says you should be.
So instead of putting it in those elements, maybe you're finding like the symbols. Yeah. I love that.
It could also be, it could be a lot of things, like we are so shaped by stereotypes. So a symbol could be a woman wearing a flat shoe, and you thinking that because that woman has on flat shoes, she's queer. Or a symbol could be a man having his hair, well, not anymore, but his hair braided. And because, you might associate, a few years ago, now everybody gets their hair braided now, but you may associate that with being a woman. So that's a symbol.
Oh, okay.
Or dyeing your hair purple might be a symbol that many people might not get, but you might read something into it,
I do wonder.
Symbolic.
Because then, I'm just going to do the whole page. The whole thing is spiritual, right? But then she goes on to say, this is where the poetry comes in. At first, I thought the italicized parts were poetry, but then she goes on literally to say, days from pumpkin until the year's midnight. She literally mean from October to New Year.
Right? Halloween.
How beautiful. Days from pumpkin until the year's midnight. When my sisters and I hovered indoors playing potsy on the holes in the rosy linoleum that covered the living room floor. On Saturdays, we fought each other for the stray errand out the doors, fought each other for the emptied Quaker oat boxes, fought each other for the last turn in the bathroom at fall night, and for who would be the first one of us to get chicken pox. She literally then goes on to, maybe these are the symbols, like, because now I'm connecting what Ron is naming. Maybe it's literally these memories, right? These memories may be the symbol of her survival, as opposed to like the thing or the person or the women. Because I think the original thought for me was, why aren't the women the symbols, But I'm not Audre Lorde. I'm not brilliant. I'm just trying to connect dots where I can. Yeah, folks, any other parts from now, any other chapters that stood out to folks? Anything that seemed like, why is this happening? Is there anything that was confusing?
Isn't there one point where she calls her mother queer or something like that?
Yeah, she's questioning her mother's, not so much her feminism, but her being, her,
Do we know where that's at? Can we find that on the pages? Do we know where that's at?
I can't even remember.
Was that the part when she's talking about her mother and sisters back in Grenada on that other island? And she talks about the women on, I think it's Belmar. She talks about the women on that island and how close they are to each other. There was something in that description of the women. I don't remember. I don't know if that's what you're referring to. But that was a point where I thought, oh, is she implying something about like a sisterhood or a way that women were with each other that nobody talked about?
But it went beyond. Felt like, and I cannot find it, but it almost felt like she was using that word to define any woman who's strong.
Mm.
You know, any woman who is, regardless of whether they are with men or with women, you know, the mere fact that they have a strength that is equal to strength as far as their way of, their bearing, their way of being, their way of thinking, not being a second-class citizen to men. You know, I'm gonna spend the rest of the night looking for this.
It could be
I know, I'm like,
chapter
Ron,
2.
you got me looking at the,
It was
like,
think it's-
early, it was before
I
chapter
think it's
4.
page 15. If you look at My Mother Was a Powerful Woman, this was so in a time when the word combination of woman and powerful was almost unexpressible. That it?
is
No,
that the
that's
one?
not it. That's not it.
Mm.
So let's
Powerful woman
continue.
equals something else quite different from, there was a third designation.
I mean, let's continue. I wouldn't, don't like,
No, because that's
spend the rest
part
of
of
the
what
night.
Oh,
we're
wait, but
talking
I
about.
think, but Ron, I think she's close. I think, well, I don't know. If is it this part where it's like, as a child, I always knew my mother was different from the other women I knew, black or white. I used to think it was because she was my mother, but different how? I was never quite sure. Other West Indian women around, a lot in our neighborhood at church, other black women as light as she, probably the low island women, red bone, different how? I never knew. But that is to why this day I believe that there have always been black dykes around in the sense
That's
of
it, that's it.
yeah,
Oh,
sense of powerful and woman-oriented women who would rather have died than use that name for themselves, and that includes my
My
mama.
mama.
So you're literally saying, did she just choose not to take that name because of the stigma? Is she questioning her?
Yeah, but also like, what does women-oriented women mean at that time? Maybe it does mean queer, but it felt like it was something other than that. That it just was like women who did not send, like almost taking the label away, whether you are heterosexual or queer. It's just like, you are this strong woman, and you know, let's keep it moving. You know, it didn't feel like it was mired in preference to me.
I hear you, but then and maybe my mind thought that too, but then I think of what Anais told us earlier when we were having the conversation about the body and the 4-year-old feeling sex, is that maybe we start with the understanding that queerness is there, that is what it is. It's not in spite of queerness, it's because of queerness, that and because of like phobias around queerness, her mother would never take that name, but the identity of being a woman-oriented woman, of this is why the origin of black dykes are around in this sense, because it's not in spite of, is because of, you know. I think, yeah, I have nothing to say. I'm just regurgitating. That's a great point.
If you go to page 16, 1, 2, 3, the fourth paragraph again, she's kind of equalizing her mother to someone different.
Let me see.
Something, you know, not like all the other mothers.
My mother was different from other women, and sometimes it gave a sense of pleasure and specialness. There was a positive aspect of feeling set apart, but sometimes it gave me pain, and I fancied it for the reason for so many of my other childhood sorrows. You know, and then she goes on to say, if my mom were like everyone else's mom, and then she says, but most often her indifference was like the season or a cold day or a steamy night in June. It just was, with no explanation or evocation necessary. I do wonder if standard societal homophobic ideas of womanhood mean that you have to sort of care and give a fuck about everything and everyone else 20 million times more than you do yourself. And if what the liberating sort of queer questioning, lesbian questioning, dyke questioning that Audre has around her mother is, you seem to lack that sense of putting everything before yourself. You seem to understand pleasure and put yourself and center yourself. So maybe she understood her mother's existence outside of the normal cis heteronormativity that Black women are supposed to be in. This idea that you care about everything and everybody, before yourself. And Audre's mother seems like the type of woman that sort of held herself down first, even if her emotions came before her child, right? It was like, no, I'm gonna be good, so you better figure it out. And I wonder if sort of that protest of standing up differently in a different identity, or even if she were cishet, being able to name that, like, she did not walk in the ways of patriarchy, right? She's naming that, like, she's a woman-oriented woman. Maybe it's just that alone that makes Audre question her sexuality, you know, because she doesn't have a mother that's modeling herself the way the other moms are, right? I did it like this because I'm giving PTA vibes, but you know what I mean? Especially back then in those times. Let's consider when she was born too.
Right.
Well, let's look at this time period that she was born, right? It's a poor Great Depression in New York, right? It's terrible conditions, and she's living in New York, right? And it's a weird sort of racial understanding the city is identifying with at the time. So her mother really does come from this space, even though her daddy was around or whatever, he was distant. So her mother comes from this space of sort of carving her own. I think that sort of womanhood is queer. I don't think a cishet woman understands that sort of, I mean, not maybe, I'm not talking about necessarily in every term, but I think cishet women are often normalized, society normalizes us to not center and to put all the needs and the worries of everyone else before our own. And I get the impression that this woman didn't walk in that. And I think to not walk in that is a clear and queer sort of way of life. The way I understand queerness from my lens is that it is a liberatory path, right? Cishet bodies will never really understand what it takes to be able to show up day after day in queer body and be able to articulate it, emulate it, carve out your own way of love, your own way of being. And I think Audre's trying to center us in that when she talks about her mom. She can be a Black dyke because her mother was a different sort of woman, you know?
Can we look at
Thank you, Al. What happened?
Can we look at the third paragraph on that same page, 16?
Yeah, let's go. You want to read it for us? I'm tired of reading.
Since my parents shared all making of policy and decision in my child's eye, my mother must have been other than woman. Again, she was certainly not man.
Okay.
The three of us children would not have tolerated that deprivation of womanliness for long at all. Now, here's the myth. We'd have probably packed up our craw and gone back before the 8th day, an option open to all African child souls who bumble into the wrong milieu.
So what is she naming there? Thank you. Snaps. You know, I love the snaps. Oh, y'all don't know, this is our first session back. For those of you that know me, I love giving claps and snaps.
She's a snapper.
I'm a snapper and a clapper. So, wait, sorry. What are we saying? Oh, why this defect? Tell me what this is. She's saying her mother is otherworldly, not even a man. What does that mean for us? What are we supposed to walk away with?
Independence,
your mother's
real
amazing.
clear-headed. Yeah.
And if you go to
Particularly in
page,
that time period.
you
Right.
go
We're
to page
talking about before
17.
World War II.
Yeah,
Right.
That's how it all brings it back. In page 17, the second full paragraph at the end, she just embodies the whole thing, being Black, foreign, female, in the 20s, in New York City, in the 30s, was not simple. And her mother was also light-skinned. She's trying to say, when she was quite light enough to pass for white, but her children weren't. So her mother was powerful, not to be played with.
Does it allow us to be more forgiving?
Forgiving
Y'all were
for
maybe
what?
already more forgiving. I'm the one that was like, I ain't forgiving for what? Yeah, you're like, forgive for what? She beat what? So what? She was a tough mom, whatever. I'm the millennial, like, oh no, like she's being mean. But I mean, the idea that like if she had to carve her own womanhood, then perhaps it does excuse, or not excuse necessarily, because we did read Bell Hooks All About Love last year, and we learned that all of these things matter and how we understand each other in terms of love. But it does sort of give a leniency to Audre's mom, because we do see that despite it maybe being harsh or whatever at times, she's making strong impression on her daughter's ability to sort of see herself outside of the normativity that women are supposed to be in, right? Because we see her like, oh, well, I don't know what my mother was, but she was something different. And she even says, I knew after a certain point, I couldn't fuck with her too much. I had to do, she grows up. She is a rebellious child, but she does at some point start to say that, I had to go through changes because failing, I think in chapter 8, she talks about how not getting it done is not an option.
We didn't read chapter 8.
Yes, we did, to 65.
No, we didn't.
Oh,
No.
Spoiler
Spoiler alert.
All right, spoiler alert.
I know, because at the park.
I don't even know why I brought that up then. What are we talking about?
Because at the park, he went on to page 66. But then if you read the emails,
all right.
The two locations are causing a little, because we're in two locations, it's causing a little conflict. So that's why
I also like to be ahead because I'm facilitating.
But the chapters are beautifully written and read. You can just read them through and through. But I stopped at 6.
Which is what.
Well, look, I didn't spoil. Yes, stop at 6. I didn't spoil anything. All I'm naming is that Audre's ability to sort of see her mother, even in the difficulty of it, she understands that like she wants to appease her. She wants to say, yo, this otherworldly person, I want you to see me and like have a sense of pride. So I'm going to switch it up. I'm not going to be crazy in school. I'm not, if I'm doing crazy things, that's what she says. She's like, I better not get caught, because getting caught and disappointing my mother was not an option. And now my mother isn't necessarily like Audre Lorde's mother, but I relate to that feeling. Does anyone else have that feeling of like, yeah, growing up in my home, even if I did fail, I had to navigate that because bringing that to the home was not an option.
Right.
Yeah. Is that something reflective of time? Is that a cultural thing? Is that because we're Black and brown people? Like, what do we think? Immigrant life? Ow, I see you, Liliana. What do we think about that? We all just went, yep. Which means maybe we all didn't have, oftentimes I understand people having the luxury of being able to sort of mess up, right? That's sort of like that's sort of the parenting of today. I want my child to, which is beautiful. It's also the educators of today. It's great, right? And we in a pandemic, please let these kids mess up because we don't really know what we're doing, right? But what do we feel about the idea that like a lot of us did not grow up that way? I know I look young. I'm not. It's a lie. It's a farce. This is a magic trick. I'm very old. What does that mean?
Very old.
Anna, stop it. You
don't know what very old is.
Anna, stop it.
She sure doesn't.
Pam,
my mom was not having it. Don't embarrass me in public. We have company. Put on your cute little nightgown with your nice mansion robe, and if you're going to show up into the room, you be dressed appropriately. And if I ask you to play the piano, you play the piano, and don't poke your lips out and give me. So it's all that stuff. And I look at my grandchildren today, and they're just all over the place and nowhere. And I didn't have that freedom to be unstructured.
Yeah.
I have to say, at this moment in my life, I'm very thankful for that. Because I see how they're just, they're not attending school. They tell you they're not intending to be like mean. I had to go somewhere. That's right. I'm going somewhere.
You couldn't just not.
Yeah, that you had no options. You had to do. I mean, I'm 59, so there were things that I was expected to do to get to a decent place in life to care for myself if I never had a partner in life. So they're not growing up like that today. Not the ones I see. I'm so disturbed by that.
Right. Do we see it as easier or harder? I see where you're at, Pam. You're like, listen, I don't know if it's easier or harder, but they're certainly going to have a hard time if they don't get it together.
Oh, they will have a hard time. They are having a hard time.
I mean, I from what I understand, a lot of us are educators, scholars, and at a very basic level, we're community leaders in the space. Do we think that, is it better to sort of be in the sense of like, I can never disappoint my parents, so whatever I do, even if I fail, I got to navigate that to make sure? Or is it a balance? Do you just go completely unhinged and sort of let failure come into the home? Like, what do we think?
If you don't have expectations, what do you reach for?
Right. And that has to come from home, right? You can't just go to school
Yes.
and be like, oh, you know what? I'm a
Right.
My daughter is 30 years old. She wants to retire. Right now.
Is she teaching?
No, she just started a job. She just started working. And she hates the job, but she wants to retire like mommy. I'm like, put in your years first. They just like, they're out of touch. But it's our fault because we spoiled them. Or at least we spoiled them because we wanted a little better for them. But damn, they took that to the next level.
Do we think Audre would have been sort of a different, clearly she's always loved books and writing. I'm the type of person that believes that our experiences shape us. But I also firmly believe that, like, especially when you're great at what you do, you were born with that understanding. You were always going to do that in spite of, despite, because of, the lack of, the abundance of whatever's going on with you. You know, I believe Michael Jordan would have found the basketball, whether he was born in Alaska or North Carolina. You understand what I'm saying? Like, or if it wasn't basketball, it would have been his athleticism, right? The ambition, the brilliance. So my question then, if we understand that, or if you could see where my gist is, do we believe Audre would have been sort of the prolific, challenging sort of writer that she is, if she sort of didn't have to navigate stricter circumstances? But then I'm going to remind you, she's also an artist. She's a poet. And I say that because I am too. And she's better than me. So can you imagine? She's an artist. She's a poet. So she has a really sensitive artist self. Would she have benefited from a home where she'd be able to bring those mess ups and fuck ups to the table? I pose the question to y'all. What do we think? Of course, I'm asking you to pretend because we know the answer. Like, she's a great writer. But what do we think?
Barbara, say something.
Parenting influence. Yes. What you said?
Barbara, she's over there quiet over there.
Barbara, come on. You want to help me, Barbara? You run book. Barbara's like, this is not my book club.
So, Ron, are you going to protect me or do I have to protect myself?
You have to be.
Protect you. Why do you need Ron to protect you?
I just want to say something. If people don't want to participate, you know, they just want to be in this space, by all means, allow
It's the
them.
teacher in me. I had to bring her out.
That's okay.
But allow people,
I can handle Anna.
people to be in
Yeah,
this
Barbara's like,
space
I got Anna.
without being, called on, because it's not class, and I don't want it to be class, teacher.
No.
Anna.
It felt like, Anna, it felt like not a teacher moment. It felt like, when the kid is like, where my friend at? She got an opinion. When you have that student where it's like, I don't know, miss, but my friend. And you be like, damn, I'm eating chips. Why are you calling the teacher? I'm trying to eat these chips. You're in my face. Like, what's going on? I've been both friends. I've been the chip eater and I've been the other one.
But Ron covered everybody. He said you'd have to read the chapters.
I know.
You could have just woken up. It's like, she's
so
listening.
Here's the truth. The truth is that I didn't read. So I'm like trying to follow up and I'm like, oh my God, I hate this. But I still wanted to participate and be here. That's why.
No, please. Yeah. And this is less about reading, I guess. Let me redefine the question so it could be like less strict to the book. But we found ourselves sort of in this conversation around the expectation of, knowing that there are expectations in the home, and the expectations are so strong that like you cannot bring anything less than that to the home, versus being able to sort of bring your mess ups into the family space and say, I need help. I don't know how to do this. I'm failing at this. And we're just trying to figure out, like, what do you think makes a better writer? And I'm asking us to just fit, we're dreaming here because we know that Audre's strict upbringing has contributed, if not making her a better writer, at least to a pretty damn good book, right? So I want you to think outside of what we know and just sort of ponder the question. And this is not just Barbara. Now that I've said it again, this is everybody. Like, yeah, like what? Is a stricter sort of upbringing the key, or being able to bring your fuck ups to the family and the table the key? Or is it something in between?
That's a good question. It could be a mix. Like you think about situations and people who have contributed a lot to society, their past, but either way, I think that she would have defined a lot of those odds, because the fact that she did not speak until 4, And still, you know, like I think about that, like in today there will, you know, there will be so many red flags for a child who's not speaking up, for they will already label that child, oh, this child has some issues, especially class, needs to go, maybe has out, like there's so many, you know, they would already label. But the fact that, you know, they, I don't know, like it's, I think about, like, I did grow up in a very strict household, single parent. But I also have friends who had the opposite, and you know, and they still were able to, you know, come through and have a decent and art, you know, that they are inspired. So it's really hard to say at the end of the day. It's on the individual at the end of the day.
Yeah, I love that. It's so common for us, right? As Black and brown people, it's like, yo, either way, we're expected to, I think now that we're talking aloud, I think what I hear is like, either way, whether we have the luxury to sort of break that apart with our family or we have to do it alone, we are expected to do so, right? The end of the story can't be, oh, and that person didn't figure it out. Especially in a Black and brown body, that's not enough of a oomph, right? Why do we do that? Would this be a good story if, like, she didn't figure it out? Would we be as committed to her? Or are we committed because of how successful she is? You don't have to answer me. I just want you to, I want it to bother you. No, I'm kidding. But I want you to ponder that, you know.
I couldn't find that YouTube with James Baldwin, huh?
No, let me oh, this is not my computer, but
and I looked and I'm
gonna go to Google right now. We're all gonna do it together. If you're able to open up a Google tab, let's go, y'all.
I'll do it, and you guys continue. I'll find.
Great, Ron is gonna pull it up.
Were
So
they actually having the conversation, not a script?
No, I don't think it was recorded.
There is a recorded one, but yeah, the one you'll find is the script. I would have to look through my files for the recording. But did anyone get a chance to like look at that, examine that, or okay? Well, let me bring it up because a lot of folks weren't at the last session. James Baldwin and Audre Lorde have a very famous conversation. Are we familiar with it? Okay. Yeah, so we're actually meeting in person on Saturdays at the James Baldwin Learning Center at Lincoln High School. So as we were sitting there, I got super excited because I was like, yo, we're reading Audre Lorde, and Jimmy and Audre are best friends, or at least very, very, very good friends. They're like very close friends. And they have, and then Ron just put the link inside the chat. You'll see For Harriet sort of has the script, and I'll find the audio and we'll be able to share that soon. But it's called, the conversation is called Revolutionary Hope. And it's a conversation between Jimmy and Audre. And now these are both Black, New York, gay and lesbian, respectively, writers, authors, poets, similar age range, and a very deep kindred connection that they have, because they're both kind of like snarky, you know, and like hilarious, but also like very New York, like they're over everything, you know, a little bitchy, but like with a lot of love. And they start from this very friendly, like homey conversation, and it ends up getting very amazing and intense. And you kind of see how Audre and Jimmy are they're talking about the same issues. They're talking about being Black, they're talking about being queer, they're talking about being from New York, but in such different lenses. Particularly, Audre challenges James around his role as a Black gay man. She's like, yes, you are Black and you are gay, but you are still a man. And therefore, you'll never be able to really understand. And he's challenging her ferociously. He's like, Audre, of course I understand. How can you say that? And, you know, my Blackness, my patriarchy doesn't exist on a cishet level. I'm in love with men. I'm seen as weaker. Like, that's like you. And she's like, no, because you're a man that loves a man. And while it is seen as weaker, it's nothing like what's happening to me. And they sort of have what a modern millennial BuzzFeed people my age want. Well, I get it, y'all. I'm the enemy. I get it. What someone my age range would call like an oppression Olympics almost. But that is actually, and that's probably what people would say, but that's actually not how I read it necessarily. I see it as a friend really trying to, particularly Audre, really meeting the womanhood and the feminism that has to exist in order for her to be able to be the artist that she is in the world. And it's something that James doesn't quite understand. It's a beautiful thing. And if y'all don't get to read next week, at least read that. It's in the chat, watch it. We're going to be able to talk about it because I think that lens, particularly, let's name that these are queer stories, is a story about lesbian women, queer women, and regardless of however you identify within your own identity approaching the work, we're trying to see Blackness in the queer lens and praise it, uphold it. And it's important that two other queer people are able to be in that conversation and challenge each other. And I think it's something that we'd be able to learn from as a group. And with that being said, we have 6 minutes left. It's powerful, right? Ooh, feel it. I want to name that next week, we are on October 26th, we should be reading chapters 7 through 14. Don't be like me. Well, now be like me and read ahead. Chapters 7 through 14. I really want to say I am so grateful for this conversation tonight. This feels like a really great first discussion and session into the book. Bring any sort of insights y'all have. Ron, is there anything you want to announce sort of or name?
I mean, just, be ready to talk next week.